Hello, good afternoon. I'm Molly O'Brien. Thanks so much for joining us here on GoLocal Live. It is Monday, April 2nd, and we have a busy show for you today. We're going to start things off by saying hello and welcome to our friend Alex Sullivan. He is the managing editor of Decider.com. Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much for joining us. So last time we checked in with you, we were talking about all things to watch for the spring season of TV, and now we're kind of doing take two. There's a lot of stuff coming up in just the month of April alone, so we wanted to have you back and talk about all the new shows, the returning shows, some kind of limited series, and some specials that are coming up in just the month of April. So let's dive in. A lot of people talking about the big buzz. Jesus Christ Superstar was last night. NBC's been doing a lot of these kind of live shows, and I feel like this one really hit the mark. What are your thoughts?
Well, we know from the ratings that it was bigger than Hairspray, so live musicals aren't going away anytime soon. I think people generally liked it. We were talking about it a little bit in the office this morning, and it wasn't a disaster, which sometimes people watch these because they're a disaster. It wasn't an enormous success where people are in love with it, like, say, The Wiz, but it did well. It was good, and there were some good moments. To get a little pluggy, if you check out Decider.com, we have 5 meme-worthy moments you can check out from the musical on the site right now. But yeah, it went well. It was, a nice tie-in with the whole Easter Sunday thing. So we'll be seeing more musicals in the future.
So is this one of those things where if you're not a fan, it's too bad. They're just gonna keep putting them down our throats.
Yes.
All right.
Basically. Yeah, I mean, I like musicals and I like watching the live musicals. And I think really what they're looking to do is they're trying to create talked about moments specifically on broadcast TV because it's so hard right now. And when you have a live musical, everybody, for better or for worse, kind of tunes in to see, oh, is it going to be a car crash? Can I tweet about this? What's the terrible thing that's going to happen? And once they're there, if it's good, like Jesus Christ Superstar was, they'll tweet about it anyway because they're already on. They made the time.
They made the time exactly. So what I was so curious about is, I mean, I'm a John Legend fan, and I think so many people are, so they wanted to see that. But then, of course, there was Alice Cooper, so that's kind of the, like, curiosity factor, too, right? So a lot of people were interested in that.
hmm Yeah, and Alice Cooper was a little sleepy last night, so that's all right. Hopefully, you got a good nap today. And Sarah Bareilles was great. I mean, the standout number of the show is "I Don't Know How to Love Him," and she nailed that, and everybody was really happy with that. So I think it's all good. I think maybe we'll even see them bring this one back for next Easter. We'll have to see what happens.
All right, round two for next Easter. All right, so that just kind of kicked things off for the month of April, but there is a ton of programming coming up. So we're going to see a couple things just starting in the next couple days. What do you have for us?
Sure. At risk of just listing off a kabillion shows for you, I'll kick it off. April 3rd is the premiere of The Last OG, which is Tracy Morgan's return to television. Very excited about that. Tiffany Haddish is going to be in it, so that's a pretty big deal. And by all reports, it's really funny, so that's good. He went through a horrible traumatic incident where he got into a car crash years ago now, and he's slowly been working his way back. So I think even beyond that, though, it's nice that he's on a very funny show because he's a very funny guy. And the same night, one of my absolute favorite shows on television from last season is returning. It's Legion. Season 2 is going to be on FX. This is kind of set in the world of the X-Men movies, but even if you're not a superhero fan, it doesn't matter. It's from Noah Hawley, the guy who created Fargo, and it's ridiculously visually inventive. It's like nothing else on TV. It stars Dan Stevens, who, sorry to keep bringing up musicals, he was the Beast in Beauty and the Beast, so you might know him from that, as well as Downton Abbey. Aubrey Plaza is on it, and it's phenomenal. I cannot recommend that show enough.
So do we just need to catch up? This is season 2, so we need to catch up here in the next couple days so we can dive into season 2.
Well, the good news is there's only 8 episodes on
Okay.
season 1, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Season 2 is 10 episodes long, so you'll have to put in a little more of a commitment, but it's well worth it.
Definitely worth it. All right, and then we only have to wait a couple more days for the next few shows to come out.
Sure. There's a bunch of them. I'll just mention this very briefly, but April 6th, this is a hugely fast turnaround from DreamWorks. The Boss Baby is back in business on Netflix. So if you have kids, they'll probably be demanding you see that. And my apologies and my condolences to you and to myself who has kids. Then April 7th, there's 2 big premieres. Paterno, which is a movie from HBO starring Al Pacino, is going to come on. So there's a lot of interest on that. And then the same night is the highly anticipated return of Trading Spaces. Paige is back on TLC with the show. I don't know if you watched it back in the day, but this is like one of the OG home redecoration shows, and it's great. So if you're into those things at all, definitely check that out. And the last thing on this kind of weekend thing, Howard's End is premiering. That's going to be on Stars, I want to say. that and that's we actually have a review up, and it's a little mixed. You know, it's a gorgeous miniseries. Haley Atwell, who is Agent Carter, and been in a bunch of other stuff, is in it. There's also a great cast. But according to our reviewer, it's well made, but a little slow. On the other end of the spectrum, BBC America is premiering a show called Killing Eve, which is a kind of comedy drama about a serial killer. And it's from Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who I don't know if you ever saw any of her shows, but she's phenomenally talented. It's going to be one of the weirdest shows on television. And if you're a fan of BBC America's shows like Orphan Black, I think that's going to be well within your wheelhouse.
So, and that one has Sandra Oh in it, right? So if you're a Sandra Oh fan. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. I'm curious, were you able to get any sneak peeks of these? Like, did you get a glance at Paterno at all? Because that looks... I'm wondering if you have any inside scoop on it at all.
I don't really have any inside scoop. It does look fascinating. It's something we're very eager to dive into and take a look at. We should have some sort of review or something up later in the week.
Okay.
The thing that's very interesting about it is how Al Pacino has moved into these, not exactly movies of the week, but HBO movies of the week.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of an interesting move for his career. So one of the writers here and I were just talking about this, and I think we'll have something up about that later in the week as well. But as it is, he's a great actor. It's obviously like really hot button subject matter, so it's kind of a can't miss as far as Saturday nights go.
Yeah, so the cast looks absolutely fantastic. I mean, just watching the trailer online, it's kind of one of those, yeah, definitely can't miss. And Al Pacino looks like he's doing a phenomenal job. And like you said, falling into those HBO roles. So it should be exciting. Okay, so we'll check back into Decider.com for more updates later on in the week. Can't wait for that.
Yeah, so teasy this episode. Sorry about that.
No, I'm excited. Can't wait to follow that content. Okay, so that kind of takes care of this coming week. And then continuing on through the, the month of April, next week we have more shows. What can we expect for next week, too? We're just filling up our DVRs and all of our streaming content.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you guys. The TV, they keep making it. It just keeps coming. Awesome. New Girl is coming back for its final season on April 10th. So if you're a fan of that, this is your last chance to check it out. I was talking to somebody the other day who actually didn't know it was coming back. They thought it was already done, but nope. One more season, and then that's it. On another returning front, on April 11th, The Expanse is coming back to Sci-Fi. If you haven't checked the show out before, there's only 2 seasons. They're kind of shortened seasons, so again, pretty easy to jump in. But it's basically, the best description is it's like Battlestar Galactica meets Game of Thrones, because it's very eager to just kill off all of its characters. It's super shocking. I don't want to spoil any of the twists or turns, but it's one of those shows that's kind of bubbled below the surface. So if you want to get on the ground floor like a new Game of Thrones, it's definitely one to check out. And also on the space bent, on April 13th, Netflix is going to be premiering Lost in Space, which is their reboot of the series. And this is actually going to be surprisingly awesome. Again, on the like Battlestar Galactica, you never know what's going to happen. It's a little more family friendly, and it's still focused on the Robinson family, lost in space, as the title goes. But it's more like one of the writers described it as a prestige drama, but for kids. And that's sort of what it is. So it's very dark. So if you have young kids, maybe stay away from it. But for the tweens and the teens and the older part of the family, you can all watch together. It's a clean show, but there's some cool twists, great effects, and we can't recommend it enough.
Oh, that's awesome. It's always nice to be able to, if you have a family, to find shows that you can watch together. So if it's one of those, but maybe just on the older end.
Yeah, I think what Netflix is probably going for is they had such huge success with Stranger Things, so they're looking for the next thing, and it's kind of on the lines of that.
Okay, on the lines of that. All right, and then a couple other ones. We like to talk Walking Dead here. So Walking Dead coming up, wrapping things up.
April 15th is arguably going to be the biggest day in Walking Dead history, because they have the finale of this season of The Walking Dead, which is going to finally bring the war between Rick and Negan to a close. People have been asking for that for seasons. I can guarantee you, without any getting into spoilers, it's done April 15th. But the thing that's really cool that's happening is right after that at 10 o'clock is the premiere of Fear the Walking Dead, and they're doing the first ever crossover. So Morgan, who's a character on Walking Dead, somehow, again, without getting into spoilers, somehow is going to end up on Fear the Walking Dead. And there's a lot of questions up in the air on that because where they left Fear the Walking Dead the last season is every character could be dead except for one. Before this, Fear the Walking Dead took place earlier in the timeline of The Walking Dead. So how does Morgan get there? Which Morgan is it? A lot of questions up in the air, but people are going to be super interested, and it's such a big deal. They're actually going to be showing it off in movie theaters to fans the same night, both episodes. So that should be kind of a cool event if you want to check it out that way.
Oh, that is really fun. What a great way to watch that. That's a really fun event. All right, so that's April 15th, but there is another show that you wanted to talk a little bit about on April 15th.
Oh, sure. Yeah, The Circus is returning, which is kind of a fascinating thing. I don't know how much you paid attention to this, but that followed the 2016 election and a couple of other things. Mark Halperin, who was one of the two guys who was a linchpin on the show, had a sex scandal and is not going to be back on the show. So instead, it's going to return for a third season with Alex Wagner of CBS News, and it's going to focus on the midterm elections. If you have any interest in elections or what's going on in politics, this is one of the most even and fascinating shows on television. It'll be very interesting to see what happens with this upcoming season with all of the changes, but check that out. Definitely a different sort of thing than the Walking Dead event happening at the same time.
Yeah, let's talk about maybe not so much.
Yeah, kind of.
Where can people find that one? Where's the circus air?
That's going to be on Showtime.
That's on Showtime. Okay. And then one of my favorites, so on April 22nd, two shows coming up. One of my favorite, I've been looking forward to this, Westworld's coming back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of questions about this. HBO is definitely looking for the next Game of Thrones at this point, particularly because the show is going to be wrapping up in next year. And Westworld, I think, has the best chance. You know, there was a lot of stuff going on in the first season. If you've never watched it, it's about this futuristic theme park called Westworld, where there are hosts who are robots, and they're completely lifelike. By the end of the first season, this is a little bit of a spoiler, but you knew this was coming. The hosts revolt and start killing all the humans. So that's where we pick up in season 2. We're going to see a lot of other parks this season, at least 4 of them. We're going to see Shogun World, which is kind of an Asian, Japanese inflected world. We're probably going to see Roman World, Medieval World, and another mysterious world. We don't know what it is yet. But as the robots slowly spread this virus of awakening, there's going to be a lot more questions, a lot more twists. And if you're a fan, I mean, you already know this show is one of the most gorgeous shows on TV.
It's so beautifully done, and that's what I love about some of these shows. We're going to talk about another one where you can follow into it. There's so many shows right now that they look like movies. Mm-hmm. And it's so nice to be able to sit down and appreciate that, and then you can go back and watch them again. You really feel like you're in that setting. So that's what's nice about Westworld. So that's April 22nd, and another show as well, Into the Badlands. Tell us what that's about.
Yeah, Into the Badlands is another one that I feel like is kind of bubbling by the surface. It's on AMC. It takes place in a crazy futuristic world where guns have been outlawed. I don't know if we have any relationship with that, but instead of guns, they'll use swords. So it has a lot of wire work and a lot of kung fu. It's a little more fantasy than sci-fi, but the fights are arguably the best on television. Like, if you're watching it for nothing else, the plot is fun, the actors are fun, but if you want to see crazy kung fu fights with swords nonstop, this is the show for you.
That sounds pretty cool, just if you want to see some action.
Exactly.
I like that. And then we still have a couple more to get into. The 100, I have not jumped into this, but it's definitely on my list, just for the characters alone.
Yeah, so this is entering its 5th season on April 24th, and not to keep using the same touch point, but a lot of people initially described it as Battlestar Galactica for kids, or at least teens, and that's kind of what it was like at first, but it's become a show with some of the most complicated moral decisions on TV, where no decision that anybody ever makes is correct, and it always makes things worse. And so it takes place in the future, the Earth has been destroyed by nuclear war, except slowly society has kind of built itself up again. There's a lot of questions about this new season because there was a time jump at the end of the last season. So we have some people in space who are coming back to Earth. We have some people on Earth who may be fighting them. We don't know what's going to happen, but it should be a lot of fun to watch. On the flip side of the spectrum, you're going to get the second season of Genius is also showing up on April 24th. And if you don't know that, that's on Nat Geo, and it focuses, as the title says, on a different genius each season. This one is going to focus on Pablo Picasso, who's going to be played by Antonio Banderas. So that should be a lot of fun.
Oh my goodness, that should be fun. And then The Handmaid's Tale, highly
Yes.
anticipated season 2. I was talking about this yesterday with a friend. Can't
Hmm.
wait.
Yeah, lots of post-apocalypse that we're talking
I
about.
know.
That's on TV. But yeah, the second season of Handmaid's Tale, the thing that's fascinating about that is they've used up the source material. You know, they've gone past the book at this point, heading into the second season. Most of the cast is returning, but just as fans of the book and fans of the source material, we don't know where it's going to go. But we do know there's going to be a simmering of war coming back to Gilead, and it should be great. I mean, that it's a really hard show to watch, but it's an incredible watch with some amazing performances, and I can pretty much guarantee that's coming back that way for season two.
And again, one of those shows that's so you feel like you're watching a film. The
Hmm.
experience of it, it's so beautifully done. And yes, very hard, difficult to watch, but man, is it good. So highly anticipated coming back for season 2. That's April 25th. Before we let you go, Alex, I'm curious. There was some kind of fun news coming out for people of my generation. I grew up watching Carmen Sandiego when I was a
Uh-huh.
kid on PBS,
Yeah.
and Netflix is bringing it back. Carmen Sandiego, Gina Rodriguez, she's plays Jane the Virgin. Netflix is doing it live action. Carmen Sandiego. What are your thoughts on that?
I love it. That is perfect casting for Carmen Sandiego. I don't know exactly how they're going to do it. I mean, My Touchstone is the game show version of Carmen Sandiego with the, oh my God, what was the a cappella band? The one that sang, Where in the
Oh
world
yeah,
is Carmen Sandiego?
it's gonna come to me after this.
Yeah, we'll remember it later.
Yeah.
So I don't think it'll be like that necessarily, but I think it should be great. I mean, and Netflix has done an incredible job of bringing back kids programming in an educational way, something that a lot of channels are trying differently. But I don't know if you watched the new Magic School Bus, but that was very good as well. It was a really fun reboot
Oh,
with Kate McKinnon in the title role, and they figured out how to make it work. So I expect if it's going to be a family programming, if it's going to be fun, it should be great. I'm
uh,
excited.
I can't wait. And now I need to go watch the new Magic School Bus.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
that's so great. Well, Alex Albin, managing editor of Decider.com, thanks so much for chatting with us today. It's always fun to talk to you about the latest, and for more news and information, we'll have a link to Decider.com. He's going to have some upcoming details on all the stuff that you can watch, stream, download, and everything else for your favorite programs, what you should watch, and maybe what's not worth the time.
yeah. We'll help you decide.
He'll help you decide, exactly. Thanks so much for
Yeah.
joining us, Alex. I appreciate it. Great to talk to you as always. Hang tight as we get set up here for our next guest on GoLocal Live. Thanks for joining us back here in the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Molly O'Brien. I'd like to say hello and welcome to our next guest, Lynn Friedman. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So we're going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity and protecting your privacy online. Lynn is the Chair Data Privacy and Cybersecurity team. She heads it up at Robinson & Cole. She practices in data and privacy security law. She's a big expert and helps a lot of people out in this situation. In these kind of situations, you've been practicing this kind of law for a long time.
A long time.
Long time. So helping both individuals and companies as well. So people are concerned about their privacy, both online, protecting their data, and I think probably becoming a little bit, maybe a little more concerned after Cambridge Analytica, this whole thing coming up about protecting their privacy when it comes to social media. So we actually planned this conversation before that whole thing came out, because I think it's always good to start protecting your privacy online. Why do you think things are coming up to the forefront now, people maybe being a little bit more concerned?
I think that the media has certainly helped people understand the risks associated with their data, and in particular in social media. And a lot of times, people don't understand the basic functionality of their phones. They don't understand that companies are collecting their data, are aggregating their data, are putting it with other data, and then advertising and selling it. So, for instance, one time I went on Amazon to buy a paella pan, and then all of a sudden I started getting all these advertisements for paella pans, right? So people are like, wow, why does that happen? So people are starting to understand that their digital life is being shared more than they realize.
Oh my goodness. So let's kind of talk about that. A lot of people, we're very connected to these things, maybe glued to them, even if you don't think you are. How much data, how much are we really giving up of ourselves that we don't even know about?
A lot. So the most recent statistic that I read was that people look at their phones anytime and anywhere between 300 and 800 times a day. 800 times a day.
I
right?
believe that, yeah.
Yeah,
it's a lot.
It's a lot. And everybody downloads all the newest apps, the cool apps. And when you're downloading these apps, I have one app. And really, I do.
Can I ask what it is?
Yeah, it's Shazam. Yeah. I used to have Shazam, and then I deleted it. Because remember, when you download an app like Shazam or something like that, and I can never remember songs, right? So I used to use the Shazam app. Well, when you download it, it asks you for permission to use your microphone. Well, if you don't turn your microphone off when you're not using that app, they're listening to everything and can record because you've clicked I agree. So you click I agree for the microphone, and now your microphone is on all the time. So if your microphone, Molly, is on right now for one of your apps, they're listening to this entire conversation, which is fine because it's media and it's going to be on, it's going to be all over the world because GoLocal Prod is so popular. But when you're sitting at your desk or you're having dinner with your significant other, do you really want them listening to all of that? And they are. The other place that is of concern is when they are collecting your contacts. And so there are many apps. I deleted an app recently that wanted all of the contacts, even though it was a great app and I really liked it. I said, no, you're not going to have all my apps. And then the last one is location-based services and your camera. So just think about when you're downloading these apps, instead of clicking I agree, look and actually see what information they want from you and they're taking from you.
It's always interesting too when you think the app you're using it for something, but then they want something else. It's like, why do they want that? Why do they need access to? Yeah, why does this app need access to my camera?
Right.
It's kind of weird.
And
it's kind of spooky.
So start thinking about that, right? Because they are going to. Companies think that data is worth money, and it's like they might not need it now, but gosh, maybe they'll need it because of this other product or service. Mm-hmm. So they want all the information that they can get, and they're not necessarily thinking about, well, I'm only going to use it for this. So be careful about what you're allowing these companies to get from you, because they're monetizing your data, and many times they're accessing and collecting and selling more data than that app actually might need.
It's always scary when you start thinking, okay, you take a deep dive into this. So before we get into the social media stuff, let's continue talking about some of the stuff that we're just sharing with our digital devices themselves. What's some stuff that we can do to stop sharing personal information that we might not even know that we're sharing in the first place?
So for instance, I mean, you should always, anytime you are going onto a social media platform or you're starting a profile, be careful with the information that you're providing on your profile, because unfortunately there are evil people in the world who are scraping that information, who are impersonating you, who are aggregating it with other information to have a lot of information on you, so they can open up accounts, they can buy things off the dark web, and they can use that information. So be careful with the information that you're putting out there. Many people on Facebook, a lot of that information is being used by hackers and other kind of evil doers to collect that information, to open up fake Facebook accounts, to actually, if you don't have your privacy settings in a particular way, basically your entire account and your entire wall is open for anyone to see it. So you should always check the privacy settings on all of your social media accounts and put them where you want them to be. If you want the whole world to see your wall, then don't do anything with your privacy settings. But most people I talk to really don't want the whole world to see their wall. So look at privacy policies on all these social media platforms to see what they're doing with your data, if they're selling it, if they are allowing disclosure of that information to third parties. It's all going to be in their privacy policy and the privacy settings for all your social media accounts.
Okay. When it comes to just our digital devices, our day-to-day stuff, are there protections that we can take from people getting into this kind of stuff? I mean, does it make a difference if we put a lock screen on our phone? Does it make a difference if we're using public or private Wi-Fi, that kind of thing? Does all that really make a difference, and can it make a difference?
It all really does make a difference. So passwords, we all love passwords. They're so easy to remember, and no one likes passwords because they're a pain. And so it's really important that you have passwords. You don't use the same password across platforms, because as you've seen in the media, there have been some very big data breaches where passwords have been included. And if you use the same password, like many people do across different platforms, then they have that password, and they actually use artificial intelligence and bots to be able to use that across multiple platforms. And that's how a lot of people are getting their information taken. The passwords are very important. You should have your lock screen on. Don't disable it, because again, if you lose your phone or it's lost or stolen, if you don't have your password on, all of your information in that phone or iPad or whatever, laptop is open for someone to see. So passwords are really important. I always like to tell people, use a passphrase, because it's really hard to remember a capital letter, a lower letter, a small case letter, and a number. Use a passphrase. My favorite color is red! Exclamation point.
Oh, that's good.
It's a great one because it's capital, lower, and an exclamation point. It's long enough that most security experts are like, yeah, that's complex enough, and I can remember it when I sit down at my computer. My favorite color is red! Exclamation point. But don't try that, because that's not really my password. But it's a good. If you
I
do
just
a
hacked
phrase,
the security
yeah,
expert.
yeah, no, it's not my password, so don't try. But passphrases are a really good way to have a complex password that you can remember, and then you can use that password for different things. If you do online banking, you can put, my favorite banking color is red. If you do online shopping, my favorite shoe is red. Whatever, you can use it so you know what it is. Don't do it for everything, but passphrases are the way to go.
See, I like that so much more than because you'll hear like use the encrypted password that sets it for different like multiple levels and that kind of stuff. But now we're hearing stories of even those getting hacked. So it's really hard to know what to do. And then they say don't write your password down because then people have like books through your password and then you can't find those, all that kind of stuff. So it's almost you're curious on what do you do. And then you end up setting your password 12 times.
Yeah, and you know what? Some security experts do set their password every time they go onto a platform. So they just say, I forgot my password, and then they reset it. A lot of people don't have the patience for that.
It takes a long time.
But it does and it doesn't. That's really a great way to up your security. Is just change it every time, and then even if it's compromised, they don't have it.
I like the phrase.
Phrase is good.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about social media. So we talked a little bit about your digital devices. We kind of started peeking into the social media stuff. What I always find interesting is the amount, and you said this too, the amount of just stuff that people give away on social media. And that stuff that you're giving away, that knowledge about yourself, could in turn help people hack into your information. So besides the knowledge that you're giving away, maybe you're out of town for the weekend on vacation or something, all that kind of stuff, you could be giving actual knowledge away about maybe your passwords, like your pet name or your kid's birthday, that kind of thing. I thought that was fascinating.
So that's very true, and a lot of times these hackers, they're called trolls. They'll be trolling social media sites, particularly like for executives in companies. We've seen a lot of fraud happen when executives are about to go on vacation because they put on Facebook, hey, I'm going on vacation with my kids, can't wait. And then the hacker sees that and then will get into, for instance, the HR folks or the payroll folks and say, and try to impersonate that executive by saying, I'm about to go on vacation. I need all the W-2s of all of our employees for a quick project. Hurry and get it to me ASAP. And then, we're all good workers and we all care about our bosses and doing the right thing. So in that particular instance, because they know he or she is going on vacation, they PDF all the W-2s of all the employees to the executive. And this is still happening. It's happening all the time. It's been happening for years. But that's how detailed these hackers are getting in to see, especially for executives and companies because of these W-2, or we're also seeing wire fraud schemes. So on the personal level, there are all sorts of scary websites out there that if you really want to get scared, you can go to about kidnappings and about when you're away, they know and they go and rob you. So it's just when you're putting these things up on the internet, you should always assume that everybody can see it and that they're collecting it and they're aggregating it with everything else they can find on you. And you'd be surprised how much is out there publicly.
So now that we're all terrified.
I know. I used to be a lot of fun at cocktail parties, and now it's just
you still are fun.
It's awful.
You still are fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we know, and that's the thing though, is because I think a lot of people aren't thinking about that kind of stuff, and we need to think about it because that's the time that we live in. This is the truth is out there from a show that I used to know and like. So how do we actually share things that we want to share without oversharing too much? How can we go about it? Because we live in a society where we want to share our personal experiences in a fun, positive way. But how do we do that while still protecting our privacy and doing it in a smart way? How can we do that?
So on social media platforms, when Facebook came out, everybody wanted to be everybody else's friends, right? So limit who you're friends with. And don't necessarily friend people that you don't know. Look at their profile to make sure that they are connected to your other friends. frankly, do you want someone to be a friend on Facebook who you don't know? I think that because this is all new, the digital age is all new, and when all of these platforms were started, no one was thinking about all the bad people out there that were going to use it for bad things, right? So be smart about it. Even LinkedIn. I look at I have a lot of people I don't know on LinkedIn because a lot of us have we have broad networks, but I always look at the profile. I always look to see if there's a reason why I want that person in my LinkedIn platform, and also who I'm mutually. LinkedIn to me is not as personal. I don't put personal things on LinkedIn. I think that you have to, my kids say I should live under a rock, but I think you have to think about how much you want to be out there. Share the things that are okay that can be public, but limit what you're sharing out there with the people who are really part of your life. So Facebook and LinkedIn, Twitter, Snapchat, all of those. I think before you're posting something, think about who's going to see it and think twice about it. We've all heard about people in college and they go to get their first job and all the photos with the red cups in their hands. Be thinking about that, because when I was in high school, we didn't have it. We had Polaroid pictures, and so I'm not too worried about that coming out, right? So I think the whole world needs to think more about what they're putting out there. Understand that it's forever. It's forever. You can't get rid of it. And like my parents used to say, always think about what if it was on the front page of GoLocal Prov or the local paper. So I think people need to think more about what they're doing and what the potential effect will be in the future.
I think so too. Before we let you go, Lynn, I want to do, if people are, a lot of people, because we're digital platforms, so they're listening or watching to this on either their laptop or maybe their phone, whatever the case may be, what's one or two tips that they can do right now to protect their private information or their data? We'll do that. The things that they can do immediately, fast, simple. And then maybe one or two things they could do as we think about the long-term private security.
So the first is making sure that you have strong passwords on all of your devices, and making sure that you're not turning off the password and that you're not sharing that password with anyone. I highly recommend that you use encryption technology, because that's the only way you can really protect your data. If you are the victim of identity theft, or you are a victim of one of these data breaches, some sort of credit, I would get your credit report to see what's been opened in your name. You're allowed to get your credit report once a year for free from each of the credit reporting agencies. That's very important for you to do. It's a federal law. You can go to the FTC website to find more information about that. Passwords, check your privacy settings on all your social media platforms, and also use cash. Don't always use a credit card. And I'm still a believer in using cash, because all of these digital things are tracking you, including your credit card company, your Easy Pass. I know. I could go on and on, but those are the things that you can do right now.
Okay.
Get your credit report. It's really important. And do a credit freeze or credit monitoring if you've been the victim of identity theft or a fraud.
All right. And use cash.
Use cash. People need to have cash.
It's always good to have just some cash in your wallet.
If the electricity goes out, you have cash. You might need it.
She has a lot more advice to give, so you're just going to have to come back, right?
I'm here anytime.
Lynn Friedman with Robinson & Cole. Thank you so much for your expert advice. Hang tight as we get ready for our next guest here on GoLocal Live.
Thanks.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here in the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Molly O'Brien. I'd like to say hello and welcome to our next guest, Mary Murphy. How are you doing, Mary?
Thanks. Good. How are you?
Good. Thanks so much for joining us. Mary is the Nancy L. Buck 65 Pembroke Center Archivist at Brown University. So today we're talking a little bit about women's history. I'm really excited to talk about this. The project is Brown Women Speak. It's a collection of women's stories that have been gathered and collected over the past several years, and Mary's going to talk a little bit about the project today. It's a huge collection and continuing to be collected. Talk to us a little bit about this project.
Okay, so Brown Women Speak was started in 1982 by a group of interested Pembrokers. Those are women who graduated from Pembroke College, which was the women's college in Brown University until 1971. So interested alumni, after the rolling in of Pembroke College into Brown University, wanted to make sure that their history was captured and preserved for all time. And so they got together and started interviewing each other. This project grew and grew and grew, and it continues to grow today, and we add interviews every year. This year I think we added about 8 interviews from women who not only attended just Pembroke College, but also Brown University, younger alumni, recent graduates, etc.
I mean, it gives me goosebumps just hearing about the project. These women decided that this was so important that they actually sat down and interviewed each other. I was looking back at some of the data. This starts, you have interviews, 1907 was the earliest one, so we're talking gathering the history before the history is gone.
Right, right. So Marjorie Wood was the name of the first woman who was, well, let me say this, not the first to be interviewed, but she was the oldest graduate to be interviewed. So she graduated from Pembroke College in 1911, if you can believe it, and her memories date back to 1907.
Wow.
So we are not actually, I'm not really quite sure when that interview took place. I believe it was in the 80s, at which point she was a very old woman at the time, but she's recalling her memories back to the 1910s, basically, which is just unbelievable. Right, so she is our oldest contributor to the collection. And then our youngest is a woman who did a family interview, Sarah Foreman, and she graduated in the class of 2013.
Wow.
So, yep, right up to date.
So we're looking at, I mean, there's so many stories to be told. Talk to us a little bit about, so we're looking at the 1910s all the way up to 2013, so current times. Talk to us a little bit about what some of these stories include, the course of history that's told through women's eyes.
So it's really a story of American history. That's what I like to say. It's not just women's history, but this project is a way, it's a lens through which to study really all of U.S. history, mostly in the Eastern Seaboard, right? So for teachers, I always recommend this project for teachers and students if you're interested in studying World War I, World War II, Prohibition, suffrage, the women's rights movement, class struggles, race struggles, experiences on college campuses, life in dormitories for women in the 1930s. Really, you can plug into any topic that you might want to study.
It's absolutely fascinating. And you worked on, well, before we get to the digitization, we'll get to that in a minute. Let's dig into some of these issues, because you can go in and you can read these women's stories, or you can listen to these women's stories, and it really is all of these topics. You can look at anything from living in a dorm, what that was like. You can look at race issues. You can look at segregation, whether that's being a woman being segregated from the men on campus, or if it's a racial issue. You can look at issues dealing with Vietnam. You can look at World War I, World War II. You can there are so many things that tells the story of American history. What is it like being part of that project and looking, reading, listening to these stories?
Well, it's really just incredibly moving. So today, in preparation for coming here, I was reviewing some of the greatest hits, right? We have some interviews that are just, I love them, right? So there was a woman whose last name was Tyrell, and she graduated in 1943. Justine Tyrell, I believe her first name was. She was at Brown University on Pearl Harbor Day, right? So she's sitting in the John Hay Library when a classmate comes in and tells her that Pearl Harbor has happened. And she said there was a wave of noise that went across this very quiet library, and suddenly it was just an explosion of noise and activity around campus at this pinnacle point for a global event that's taking place. This same woman then goes on, graduates, and in 1961, she becomes a journalist with the New York Amsterdam News, which is the oldest black newspaper, which is still in operation today. So she's working as a woman in Harlem. She's a white woman herself, but writing for this historically black newspaper. And she gets to cover the best, most important civil rights events that occur in the 1960s. So she's got interactions with Malcolm X. There's a photograph of her standing next to Martin Luther King's wife. She was everywhere. And then she sits down years later and recounts this incredible life. And for me, it's just goosebumps. It's wonderful.
I'm the same, and I'm not even fully invested and involved in these archives, but just being able to recount that and listen back to it. You mentioned kind of going over some of the greatest hits. Do you have any other stories that kind of stand out or pop out?
Well, so we have we have an interview that we just did recently with a woman whose name is Mary Jane Mercuria. She graduated in the class of 1956. So she, again, was a student. She is of Japanese and then Austro-Hungarian descent, right? So she's got European and Japanese lineage, and then she comes to Pembroke College and recalls her experience of being a mixed race, multiracial student on campus in a time when that was particularly difficult, from a particularly difficult background, right? So, and she speaks about those struggles to be on campus at that time, her difficulties in making friends, and then her successes on campus, and the stories that she really loved about being at Pembroke College. So what I think is so wonderful about this interview that she did is it's not all rosy, right? Brown Women Speak isn't there to be an advertisement for Brown University. It's really a window or a way for people to study U.S. history, the good with the bad. So I really recommend that people do check it out for their school studies, whether they be American historians or students in the classroom.
And so I was kind of curious too, is what do you think that we can, whether it's young women, you know, you're an 11-year-old girl that's just interested in what it's like to grow up in America, or whether you're a 65-year-old man, what do you think we all can learn from these archives?
Well, that history matters, number one, that the humanities matter, and that, you know, we want to support the humanities programs in higher education and in secondary education, knowing our history matters today and everything that we do. So Brown Women Speak is just a tool that reinforces that important point. And also to learn about local history, if you want to study micro-histories.
Yeah.
Also, you can study them in aggregate. We've got students and scholars right now who are studying just the experience of women in World War II. So really there's something for everyone in Brown Women Speak.
What I think is really neat too is that you're able to get specific memories and their voices, and you're able to hear the women tell the stories in their own words, which if you go back and you're looking at historical context, it doesn't always put it into the point of view of these people. So you might miss something. If you're reading a history book, you might miss out on that. And so if you go back and you're looking at a personal account, there's just something real about that, because it is real.
There is. It's the voice, right? So we heard this from one of our researchers, and she was using Brown Women Speak to study prohibition. And she said that there is just something incredibly moving about the voice and the human voice, and how different it was for her as opposed to reading the documents. So oral histories are considered to be primary resources, right? They capture a singular experience, a person's individual experience and their memories of the past. This is absolutely different than a textbook, which is a secondary source, right? So again, their memories, they can be faulty, okay? So we always say that you want to back up your study of primary resources with secondary resources, but to be moved by history, oral histories can really do that for you and bring history to life.
It's absolutely fascinating. So I thought it was so cool because you do a good job. Well, let's talk a little bit about digitizing the archive. You started that in 2012-ish and just recently finished, right? How important was that to be able to take the collection of these stories and be able to digitize them and then make them available to the public?
So this was a hard project,
yeah, I
not gonna lie. Right, so the project started and the interviews were collected on audio cassettes, right? So first we had an analog to digital problem, basically. So we had technology issues, and then we had rights issues and privacy issues.
I'm just gonna have you scoot over a little bit.
And so we had all of these technological issues that we had to tackle before they could be opened. So it took a lot of work, a lot of manpower, right? Because everything that's digital, there's a human behind that work. And then over the course of many years, resource dedication, that's how we got it done. So we actually just finished our backlog a year ago. We're now up to date, but it took just a ton of dedication.
That's very impressive. I was reading some of the stories and then listening to some of the stories, and yeah, you can hear the tape recorder clicking.
Mm-hmm.
And you do have to remember that some people, they all are giving their oral histories at different points in their life.
Mm-hmm.
So I was listening to one woman's story, Beatrice Coleman. She was the class of 1925, and she passed away on April 3rd, 2014 at the age of 109.
Mm-hmm.
Her story was fascinating. So she was an African-American woman at the time. And so just to look at her story involved, and she talked about a ton of different things. She talked about race relation in her interview. And I found it so interesting. She was like, I wanted to go to Howard, but my parents made me go to Brown. So just giving that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And she graduated in 1925. So you can imagine, but it was fascinating to hear her perspective. So you don't have to imagine. You get to hear it firsthand. So it's beautiful. But also an interview with someone who's 100 years old.
Right. Definitely we had a lot of the women who were interviewed had long lives, right?
Long.
So again, the graduate from 1911, she lived to be 103. She was a librarian at Harvard.
Incredible.
Just really these miraculous lives, right? So these were smart women. They were smart. They are very smart women who care a lot about history, and they want to make sure that their legacy is remembered as well.
It's absolutely beautiful. If you get a chance to go check it out, we'll have a link to the Pembroke Center digital collection of Brown Women Speaks. So this is just one collection. You're the archivist there, and you're curating all kinds of stuff all the time. What are you currently working on now?
Okay, so yeah, we have a lot of different collections, and the one that's right in the gate right now are the papers of Anne Fausto Sterling. So she has a connection to Brown. She was a teacher of biology, and she studied human sexuality and intersexuality. And she donated her papers, her scholarly papers, to our collection.
Oh, wow.
So it's a wonderful treasure trove of correspondence and research and print material, rare 1970s print pamphlets and newsletters. She was a hardcore feminist in addition to a scholar, and I highly recommend for those interested in the meeting of science, gender, biology, check out the papers of Anne Fausto Sterling.
It would be fascinating too to see, just those early roots in the 70s, that scientific basis, and now we're at 2018, to see how far we've come and where society stands now as well, right?
Anne Fausto Sterling, just to recall, she was a professor that was at Brown for many, many years up until almost the current time. So she was in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s.
So do we have all of her research that whole time?
We have a lot of it. Not all of it, but
a lot of it?
Yeah.
That's fascinating. And is that available? Is that digitized as well, or is that
no,
on display?
Only Brown Women Speak is
Okay.
fully digitally available.
Okay.
Our other collections are truly archival in nature. We create a guide for every collection to the folder level. That means you're going to have a full map to every collection that's available for research, and that's going to tell you what's in the collection. But to really see it, you've got to come visit us at the John Hay Library, and that is open to the public.
That is. We've actually had visitors from the John Hay Library
really?
come in. Yep.
Oh, that's good.
Fun to there's a lot of stuff in there.
Yes, there is.
It's definitely
collection.
definitely worth the time
Yeah.
to go take a visit. Well, Mary, thanks so much for joining us here. This has been a fascinating discussion, and thank you for sharing your story with us.
Sure.
Part of the oral history, right?
Yep, that's right. That's right. Thanks very much.
So we're wrapping up here today on Go Local Live in the 3 o'clock hour. Josh Fenton kicks things off in just a few moments for Business Monday, starting at 4 o'clock. Thanks so much for joining us today. Have a good one.